welcome to our Time on the Web Bible study. Once again, we're in the book of Acts, and we're going to be going through chapters 23 and 24 in this lesson. And Paul has been arrested by the Romans at the temple because there was an uproar of all the city. And so now he's going to be facing his accusers and then eventually being sent to Felix, the governor, in Caesarea. So let's begin by reading Acts chapter 23, verse 1. And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then Paul said unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? Paul called him a hypocrite, and said, God shall smite thee. And that came to pass, according to Josephus, at the hands of the Sicarii, violent men or assassins, approximately 66 to 70 A.D., during the Jewish-Roman wars, for being a Roman collaborator. So these Sicarii were Jews, violent men. Okay, so let's go on. And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? And then Paul said, I wist not, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and the resurrection of the dead I am called in question. And when he had so said, there arose a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the multitude was divided. For the Sadducees said, There is no resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. And there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were of the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel hath both spoken to him, let us not fight against God. I'm just going to stop for a second. Remember how to remember the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Pharisees believed in the spirit or the soul of man and everlasting life and the resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees didn't believe in any of that. That's why they're so sad, you see. Simple. That's how you remember it. Okay, verse 10. And when there arose a great dissension, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the castle. And the night following the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying they would not either drink nor eat till they had killed Paul. And they were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. It's thought that these men who made this conspiracy were Sicarii, again, violent men or assassins. And they bound themselves under a curse, meaning they were saying, a curse fall on us if we cannot complete this assassination. So if they can't fulfill this vow, according to Jewish, I don't want to say law, but they could be absolved of the curse by a priest. So they could go to a priest if there was some mitigating circumstances that they could not complete this vow. They could be absolved of it by a priest. Okay. Verse 14, Acts 23:14. And they came to the chief priests and elders and said, We have bound ourselves under a great curse, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul. Now therefore ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though ye would inquire something more perfectly concerning him, and we, or ever he come near, are ready to kill him. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him, and said, Bring this young man to the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain, and said, Paul, the prisoner, called me unto him, and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who has something to say unto thee. Then the chief captain took him by the hand, and went with him aside privately, and asked him, What is it that thou hast to tell me? And he said, The Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldst bring down Paul tomorrow unto the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. But do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee. So the chief captain then let the young man depart, and charged him, See thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me. And he called unto him 2 centurions, saying, Make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200, at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide them beasts, that they may set Paul on, and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. Okay, so this plays out like an old Western movie, where there's going to be a lynch mob the next day coming for the prisoner at the jail. But the sheriff gets wind of it, and whisks away the prisoner with his double-barrel shotgun armed men to the night to face the trial in a safer town. Okay. And so Paul here is defended by 470 men, 200 soldiers, 70 riders, 200 spearmen, all escort him at 9 o'clock at night, or the 3rd hour of the night. 400 of the men only travel halfway to Caesarea and return to Jerusalem, and the horsemen continue with Paul. So let's read on. Verse 25, And he wrote a letter after this matter, Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor, Felix sendeth greeting. Okay, so this verse we find out that the chief captain's name is Claudius Lysias. Okay, go on. 27, This man was taken of the Jews, and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army, and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth unto their council, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or bonds. And when it was told me how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee, and gave commandment to his accusers also to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. Then the soldiers, as it was commanded them, took Paul, and brought him by night to Antipatris. On the morrow they left the horsemen to go with him, and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea, and delivered the epistle to the government, presented Paul also before him. And when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. And when he understood that he was of Cilicia, I will hear thee, said he, and when thine accusers are also come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. Okay, Acts chapter 24. The lawyer, Tertullus, speaks for the Jews. 24 verse 1. And after 5 days, so Paul's in prison, 5 days, the high priest descended with the elders, and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. How sweet! Notwithstanding, that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear of us thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also hath got about to profane the temple, whom we took, and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us with great violence, and took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. Okay. So here's the case of the prosecution. Now Paul is going to be defending himself. Acts 24, verse 10. And then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, Forasmuch as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. So Felix had been governor now about 7 years. Okay, verse 11. Because that thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city, and neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. So Paul had only been in Jerusalem 12 days up until him being sent to Caesarea. So he's saying there's hardly any time for me to do any of these things that they're accusing me of. And they didn't find me doing any of these things. Verse 14. But this I confess unto them, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. And herein do I exercise myself, to have always a conscience void of offense towards God and towards men. Now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult, who ought to have been here before thee, and object, if they had aught against me. Or else let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me, while I stood before the council. Except it be for this one voice that I cried standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called in question by you this day. Okay, let's stop for a second. We've talked about witnesses. We talked about Mosaic law concerning witnesses. And so here at Paul's trial, he's saying the witnesses aren't even here. There were no witness present regarding the accusations against Paul, and particularly those Jews of Asia who caused all the commotion. So the charges should have been dropped immediately according to Mosaic law, because 2 witnesses must testify in order for a man to be put to death. So let's read a couple of verses from the Old Testament regarding Mosaic law. Numbers 35:30 says, But one witness shall not testify against any person to cause him to die. And in Deuteronomy 17, verse 6 and 7, it says, At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. And the hands of the witnesses shall be the first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. So the Jews here were unlawful in their pursuit of Paul in this matter. And that's also giving the understanding of Jewish law concerning witnesses, that they were the first ones. The witnesses were the first ones to cast the first stone. So when Jesus said, those of you who are without sin to cast the first stone, even the witnesses of the woman who was caught in adultery had to keep silent. And that's how it worked. Okay, 24, verse 22. And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them, and said, When Lysias the chief captain shall come down, I will know the uttermost of your matter. And he commanded a centurion to keep Paul, and to let him have liberty, that he should forbid none of his acquaintances to minister or come unto him. And after certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess, he sent for Paul, and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. And as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled, and answered, Go thy way for this time. When I have convenient season, I will call for thee. For he hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him. Wherefore he sent for him the oftener, and communed with him. Bribes. He wanted a bribe. It always means favor. And fortunately, it's illegal in our country, but it's common in other countries, even today. Acts chapter 24, verse 27. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. So Paul is imprisoned 2 full years at Caesarea, which puts this timeline somewhere around 61 to 62 AD. And Paul is martyred in Rome in approximately 67 AD. So, as we're finishing up chapter 24 here, Paul's story is coming to a close in the book of Acts. But his legacy lives on some 1933 years later. His gospel of faith in Jesus Christ is the foundation for the true body of believers, by whom millions have been given everlasting life.